The blistering Arizona sun hung like a copper penny in the cloudless sky, as Sophia Ellis urged her exhausted horses forward. Beads of sweat trickled down her face, mingling with the fine layer of dust coating her skin from miles of travel along the rugged trail leading to Fort Yuma. The year was 1876, and the territory was as unforgiving as the scorching summer heat that seemed determined to crush her spirit entirely. "Just a little farther," Sophia whispered, more to herself than to the overloaded wagon creaking ominously beneath her. Every bump in the trail sent a shudder through the wooden frame, and the sound of straining axles had grown increasingly worrisome over the past mile. At 23, Sophia hadn't imagined she would be making this journey alone. 6 months ago, her parents had succumbed to influenza within days of each other, leaving her the family mercantile business in St. Louis, and a mountain of debt she hadn't known existed. The creditors had been merciless, forcing her to sell everything except what she could pack into this wagon. Her destination was her mother's sister in Fort Yuma, who had written years ago about the opportunities in the growing settlement. The sudden sharp crack from beneath the wagon came without warning. The left rear wheel gave way with a splintering sound that sent Sophia lurching sideways, nearly tumbling from her seat. The horses whinnied in protest as the wagon tilted precariously, finally settling at a dangerous angle with its contents shifting ominously. "No, no, no," Sophia cried, scrambling down from her perch to assess the damage. The sight that greeted her made her stomach sink. The axle had snapped clean through, and the wheel lay in pieces. The wagon sagged under the weight of her possessions, its frame threatening to collapse entirely at any moment. Miles from Fort Yuma with no help in sight, Sophia felt the tears she'd been holding back for months finally break free. She sank to her knees in the dusty road, exhaustion and desperation overwhelming her usually practical nature. She didn't hear the approach of hoofbeats until they were nearly upon her. Startled, Sophia looked up to see a rider cresting the hill behind her, silhouetted against the burning sky. "Looks like you've got yourself in quite a situation, madam," a deep voice called out as the man drew closer. The stranger dismounted with fluid ease, boots hitting the ground with barely a sound. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years under the western sky. His eyes, a striking shade of green, assessed her broken wagon with practiced efficiency. "Franklin Adler," he introduced himself, removing his hat in a gesture of courtesy that seemed out of place in the wilderness. "Most folks call me Frank." Sophia hastily wiped away her tears, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable moment. "Sophia Ellis," she replied, struggling to regain her composure. "My wagon, as you can see." "Appears you've been carrying the weight of the world in there," Frank remarked, moving to examine the damaged axle. His movements were confident and purposeful as he circled the wagon, occasionally pushing at the load to test its stability. "This axle never stood a chance with this much cargo on these roads." "Everything I own is in that wagon," Sophia said defensively, though she knew he was right. The shopkeeper in St. Louis had warned her about overloading, but she couldn't bear to part with more of her family's possessions. Frank nodded thoughtfully, his expression softening as he glanced at her tear-streaked face. "Where you headed?" "Fort Yuma. My aunt lives there. It's my only option now." "Well, Miss Ellis, you're in luck. That happens to be where I'm returning to myself." He gestured toward the horizon. "It's about 15 miles ahead. Your wagon isn't going anywhere, but we might be able to salvage this situation." Hope flickered briefly in Sophia's chest. "How?" Frank studied the contents of her wagon, which were now precariously balanced and threatening to spill out onto the trail. "We'll need to lighten your load. Take only what's essential. I can help carry some on my horse, and we'll have to leave the rest." "Leave it," Sophia's voice cracked. "But I know good folks in Fort Yuma who can bring a proper wagon out tomorrow to collect what remains," Frank assured her. "But right now, we need to focus on getting you safely to town before nightfall. These parts aren't friendly after dark." The finality in his tone told Sophia this wasn't a suggestion but their only viable option. With reluctance, she nodded her agreement. Over the next hour, Frank helped Sophia sort through her possessions. His strong hands worked quickly, assessing each item with surprising sensitivity. When she hesitated over a wooden chest containing her mother's quilts and family daguerreotypes, he didn't press her to leave it behind. "This means something to you," he stated simply. "We'll make room." By mid-afternoon, they had organized what Sophia would take immediately and what would remain behind. Frank fashioned a clever covering from her wagon's canvas to protect the remaining items from the elements, then secured it with practiced knots. "Your horses seem steady enough," he observed, examining the team that had pulled her wagon. "We'll take the stronger one for you to ride, and I'll lead the other with some of your belongings." Sophia watched in silent gratitude as this stranger rearranged her world with careful consideration. His movements were efficient yet gentle, and several times she caught him glancing at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Have you lived in Fort Yuma long?" she asked as he helped her mount her horse. "5 years now," Frank replied. "Started as just passing through, but something about the place got under my skin. I work as a guide and occasionally help the marshal when extra hands are needed." He secured the last bundle to his saddle. "Your aunt, what's her name? I might know her." "Margaret Winters." "She married Henry Winters about 15 years ago." Recognition flashed in Frank's eyes. "The Winters, sure. Good people. Henry runs the livery at the edge of town, and Margaret's peach preserves win the county fair every year." A weight Sophia hadn't realized she was carrying seemed to lift slightly. The aunt she remembered only from childhood letters was real and known in this place that would soon be her home. As they set off toward Fort Yuma, Sophia took one last look at her broken wagon and the carefully covered pile of possessions, all that remained of her former life. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. A life too heavily burdened finally buckling under the strain. "It'll all be there tomorrow," Frank reassured her, misreading her wistful gaze. "You have my word." "Thank you," Sophia replied softly. Not many would stop to help a stranger. Frank's mouth curved into a slight smile that transformed his weathered face. "Out here, Miss Ellis, no one stays a stranger for long." The journey to Fort Yuma passed more quickly than Sophia expected. Frank proved to be knowledgeable about the territory, pointing out landmarks and sharing bits of local history as they rode. His deep voice had a calming quality that eased her frayed nerves. "That ridge there," he said, gesturing toward a formation in the distance. "The Apache believe it's shaped like a sleeping warrior. Legend says he'll awaken if his people ever face extinction. Do you believe it?" Sophia asked, curious about this man who had appeared when she needed help most. Frank considered her question seriously. "I believe this land holds more wisdom than most give it credit for. The people who lived here for generations understood things we're only beginning to grasp." His thoughtful answer surprised her. Most men she'd known in St. Louis would have dismissed such notions outright. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the outline of Fort Yuma appeared in the distance. The settlement was larger than Sophia had imagined, with dozens of buildings clustered around what appeared to be a main street. Beyond the town proper, she could see farmland stretching toward the Colorado River. "Home," Frank said simply, a note of pride in his voice. "Not what you're used to in St. Louis, I expect, but it grows on you." They rode down the main street as the day's activities were winding down. Several people called out greetings to Frank, their curious gazes lingering on Sophia. She felt suddenly self-conscious about her dusty appearance and travel-worn clothes. "The livery's just ahead," Frank told her. "Your aunt and uncle's place." The livery stable was a substantial building with corral space behind it. As they approached, a stout man with graying hair emerged from the double doors, wiping his hands on a rag. "Frank Adler. Didn't expect you back so soon," he called out cheerfully. Then his eyes fell on Sophia and his expression shifted to confusion. "Henry," Frank called back, "I've brought someone I believe you know. This is Miss Sophia Ellis." The confusion cleared instantly, replaced with astonishment. "Margaret's niece, from back east." Henry Winters hurried forward as Frank helped Sophia dismount. "My word, we weren't expecting you for another week at least." "I made better time than anticipated," Sophia explained, not wanting to burden her newly found family with the details of her financial ruin just yet. "Until my wagon broke down about 15 miles back." "Broke clean through," Frank added. "We had to leave most of her belongings behind. I told her we could send someone tomorrow to collect what's salvageable." Henry nodded emphatically. Of course. Margaret will be beside herself. She's been preparing for your arrival for weeks." He turned toward the house connected to the livery. "Margaret, come quick. Sophia's here." A plump woman with kind eyes and graying auburn hair hurried from the house, wiping flour from her hands on her apron. When she saw Sophia, her face lit up with recognition and joy. "Sophia. My goodness, you're the spitting image of your mother." Margaret rushed forward and enveloped her niece in a warm embrace that smelled of baking bread and lavender. "We weren't expecting you so soon. She had some trouble on the trail," Henry explained. "Frank here helped her the rest of the way." Margaret turned to Frank, gratitude evident in her expression. "Thank you, Frank. You're a good man." She wrapped an arm around Sophia's shoulders. "Come inside, dear. You must be exhausted and starving. I've got stew simmering and fresh bread just out of the oven." Sophia looked back at Frank, suddenly reluctant to part from the man who had rescued her. "Will you join us for supper, Mr. Adler? It's the least I can offer after all your help." Frank glanced at Henry and Margaret, who both nodded encouragingly. "I'd be honored, Miss Ellis." "Just let me see to the horses first." "Henry can help with that," Margaret insisted, already guiding Sophia toward the house. "You've done more than enough today." As Sophia allowed herself to be led inside, she caught Frank watching her, that same unreadable expression on his face. Something warm unfurled in her chest. Gratitude, certainly, but perhaps something more. The Winters' home was modest but comfortable, with well-worn furniture and colorful quilts that reminded Sophia painfully of her mother's work. Margaret bustled about, setting an extra place at the table while chattering about local news and how pleased she was to finally have her niece with them. "We've set up the room at the back of the house for you," Margaret explained. "It gets the morning light, which is lovely. And you'll have privacy there." "I can't thank you enough for taking me in," Sophia said, the reality of her situation finally hitting her fully. "I don't know what I would have done otherwise." Margaret paused in her preparations, her expression softening. "Your mother was my only sister, Sophia. Having you here feels like having a piece of her back." She squeezed Sophia's hand. "This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be." Frank entered with Henry a few minutes later, both men having washed up at the pump outside. The simple meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and apple preserves was the most delicious thing Sophia had tasted in months. As they ate, Frank explained to the Winters how he'd found Sophia and the condition of her wagon. The axle couldn't handle the weight on those rough trails. "We'll need a sturdy wagon to retrieve what's left. I'll take care of it first thing tomorrow," Henry promised. "We can use the big freight wagon." "I'll ride along to show you the spot," Frank offered, then turned to Sophia. "If that's agreeable to you, Miss Ellis." Sophia nodded, relief washing over her at the thought of recovering her remaining possessions. "More than agreeable. I'm in your debt, Mr. Adler." "Frank," he corrected gently. "No one stands on ceremony much in Fort Yuma." The conversation flowed easily through the meal, with Margaret and Henry filling Sophia in on the town and its inhabitants. Frank mostly listened, occasionally adding details or clarifications, his green eyes frequently finding their way to Sophia's face. As the evening drew to a close, Frank rose to take his leave. "I should be going. It's been a long day for everyone, especially Miss Ellis." "Sophia," she said, echoing his earlier sentiment with a small smile, "if we're dispensing with ceremony." A pleased look crossed his face. "Sophia, then." "I'll be by around sunrise to help Henry with the wagon recovery." Henry walked Frank to the door while Margaret began clearing the table. Sophia moved to help, but her aunt waved her away. "You've had quite a day. Why don't you get settled in your room? Everything's fresh and ready for you." Sophia hesitated, then nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Aunt Margaret, for everything." At the door, Frank turned back, catching Sophia's eye across the room. "Welcome to Fort Yuma, Sophia Ellis." With a slight tip of his hat, he was gone into the gathering darkness. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed in her new room, Sophia reflected on the day's events. Hours ago, she had been at her lowest point, alone and desperate beside a broken wagon. Now she was safe, with family who genuinely seemed happy to have her, and tomorrow she would recover the possessions she'd feared lost. And then there was Frank Adler, the man who had appeared like an answer to an unspoken prayer. His kindness and steady presence had transformed what could have been a disaster into merely a detour. As sleep finally claimed her, Sophia wondered if their paths would cross again beyond tomorrow's retrieval mission, and was surprised by how much she hoped they would. True to his word, Frank arrived at the livery just as the first pale light of dawn was breaking across the eastern sky. Sophia had woken early, unable to sleep late in the unfamiliar surroundings. She was helping Margaret prepare breakfast when they heard the sound of horses outside. "That'll be Frank," Margaret said knowingly. "Punctual as always. Why don't you take him some coffee? Henry's already out in the stable getting the wagon ready." Sophia filled a mug from the pot on the stove and stepped outside. The morning air was cool, a brief respite from the heat that would come later. Frank was tightening his saddle when he spotted her approaching. "Good morning," he greeted her, his voice low and pleasant in the quiet dawn. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I expected," Sophia admitted, offering him the steaming mug. "Aunt Margaret thought you might want some coffee before you set out." Frank accepted the cup with evident appreciation. "Your aunt's coffee is legendary in these parts." He took a long sip, watching her over the rim. "You look rested. That's good." Sophia was suddenly aware of how different she must look from yesterday, her hair neatly braided, her face clean, wearing a fresh dress borrowed from her aunt. The way Frank was looking at her made her cheeks warm. "I wanted to thank you again," she said. "Yesterday was, well, it was one of the worst moments of my life until you came along." "Sometimes that's how it goes," Frank replied thoughtfully. "Our worst moments can turn into something else entirely, depending on what follows." He finished his coffee and handed back the empty mug. "Will you be coming with us to retrieve your things?" Sophia shook her head reluctantly. "Aunt Margaret has asked me to help her with some preparations at the house. She seems determined to introduce me to half the town by supper time." A smile tugged at the corner of Frank's mouth. "That sounds like Margaret. She's been the heart of this community since she arrived. You couldn't ask for a better guide to Fort Yuma." Henry emerged from the stable leading two sturdy draft horses hitched to a large wagon. "Morning, Sophia." "All set, Frank." "Should be back by midday if we make good time." "Be careful," Sophia told them both, but her eyes lingered on Frank. "And thank you." "We'll take good care of your belongings," Frank promised. With a nod of farewell, he mounted his horse and set off with Henry following in the wagon. The day passed more quickly than Sophia had anticipated. Margaret kept her busy with household tasks, all while filling her in on the history of Fort Yuma and its inhabitants. By mid-afternoon, Sophia had learned about everyone from the mayor to the schoolteacher to the Chinese family who ran the laundry. "And of course, there's Frank Adler," Margaret said casually as they kneaded bread dough side by side. "Such a good man. Came here about 5 years ago, started working as a guide for the army, then for settlers and merchants. Now he does a bit of everything: tracking, hunting, helps the marshal when needed." Sophia tried to appear only mildly interested. "He seems very capable." "Oh, he is," Margaret agreed. "And respected by everyone, which is saying something in a place like this. Even the local tribes trust him, which is rare for a white man." She gave Sophia a sideways glance. "Not married, you know. Had some offers, I'm sure, but keeps to himself mostly." "Aunt Margaret," Sophia chided gently, recognizing the matchmaking tone in her aunt's voice. "I've only just arrived." Margaret laughed, patting her niece's hand with a flower-covered one. "Just making conversation, dear. Though I will say, I haven't seen Frank look at anyone the way he looked at you last night." Before Sophia could formulate a response, they heard the rumble of wagon wheels outside. She hurried to the window to see Henry guiding the wagon into the yard, now loaded with her possessions. Frank rode alongside, speaking to Henry as they came to a stop. Sophia and Margaret went outside to meet them. Relief flooded through Sophia at the sight of her belongings safe and intact. "Everything was just as we left it," Frank reported, dismounting. "Not a thing disturbed. We'll store it all in the back shed until you decide what you want to keep in your room," Henry told Sophia. "No rush on any of it." For the next hour, they all worked together unloading the wagon. Frank handled the heaviest items with ease, seeming to know instinctively which things required the most care. When they came to the wooden chest containing her family heirlooms, he carried it personally to Sophia's room. "This should stay with you," he said simply, setting it down at the foot of her bed. "Some things shouldn't be stored away in sheds." Sophia touched the chest's smooth surface, emotion welling in her throat. "You understand?" "I've lost family too," he replied quietly. "The things they leave behind, they matter." The moment was interrupted by Margaret calling them for a late lunch. Over the meal, Henry announced that he'd examined Sophia's broken wagon. "The frame's still good, though that axle is done for," he reported. "If you're agreeable, I could repair it for you to use around town, or we could sell it for parts." "I won't be needing a wagon of my own now that I'm here," Sophia decided. "Selling it seems most practical." "I might know a buyer," Frank offered. "Tillman over at the Mercantile was saying just last week he needs another delivery wagon." "That would be perfect," Henry agreed. "I'll speak with him tomorrow." After lunch, Frank declined Margaret's invitation to stay for supper, explaining he had business to attend to in town. At the door, he paused. "The town's having a social on Saturday evening," he told Sophia, his usual confidence seemingly tempered with uncertainty. "Music, dancing, food. It's a good way to meet folks. I'd be happy to escort you if you'd like." Sophia was aware of Margaret and Henry watching with poorly disguised interest from the kitchen doorway. "I would like that very much," she answered, pleased by the invitation. Frank's face brightened with a smile that transformed his weathered features. I'll call for you at 6 then." With a nod to the Winters, he departed. As soon as the door closed, Margaret hurried over, her expression delighted. "A social. Perfect timing. We'll need to make sure your best dress is pressed." "Margaret," Henry warned good-naturedly, "don't go planning the wedding just yet." "I'm doing no such thing," Margaret protested, though her twinkling eyes suggested otherwise. "I'm simply helping my niece prepare for her first social in her new home." Sophia laughed, the sound surprising her. After months of grief and worry, laughter felt foreign but welcome. Perhaps Fort Yuma would indeed be a new beginning. The days leading up to Saturday passed in a whirlwind of activity. Margaret introduced Sophia to several neighbors, all of whom welcomed her warmly. She learned that her aunt was something of a local leader, organizing charitable efforts and serving as an unofficial mediator in community disputes. "Your aunt has a way of seeing to the heart of matters," Henry explained proudly. "People trust her judgment." Sophia also discovered that the Winters were childless, a subject they addressed openly when she finally asked. "It wasn't meant to be for us," Margaret had said without bitterness. "But we've had plenty of young ones to care for over the years. This town's children are all partly ours in a way." By Saturday, Sophia had begun to feel less like a visitor and more like someone who might belong in this place. She spent extra time preparing for the social, washing and styling her dark brown hair until it fell in soft waves past her shoulders. The dress she chose was one of her better ones, dark blue cotton with delicate white embroidery at the collar and cuffs. "You look lovely," Margaret declared when Sophia emerged from her room, "just like your mother at your age." "You think it's appropriate?" Sophia asked, suddenly nervous. "I don't want to seem like I'm putting on airs." "Nonsense," Margaret assured her. "Everyone dresses their best for the social. It's tradition." When Frank arrived promptly at 6, Sophia felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach at the sight of him. He was dressed in clean, pressed clothes, dark trousers, a white shirt, and a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. His usually wind-blown hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard. For a moment, he simply stared at her, appreciation clear in his green eyes. "You look beautiful," he said finally, the sincerity in his voice leaving no room for doubt. "Thank you," Sophia replied, feeling her cheeks warm. "You look very handsome yourself." Henry and Margaret accompanied them to the social, which was being held in the large open area behind the church. Lanterns hung from ropes strung between posts, casting a warm glow over tables laden with food and a wooden platform where musicians were setting up. The atmosphere was festive and welcoming. Frank introduced Sophia to so many people she feared she'd never remember all their names. Everyone seemed curious about her, but in a friendly rather than intrusive way. "Don't worry about keeping all the names straight," Frank advised, noticing her slightly overwhelmed expression. "It took me months." The musicians began to play and couples moved onto the area cleared for dancing. Frank turned to Sophia with an outstretched hand. "Would you do me the honor?" Sophia hesitated only briefly. "I should warn you, it's been some time since I danced." "Then we'll take it slow," he promised, leading her to join the other dancers. Frank proved to be a capable dancer, guiding her confidently through the steps of a waltz. His hand was warm and steady at her waist, and Sophia found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the music. "You're doing just fine," he assured her as they turned in time with the melody. "You sound surprised," she teased, growing more comfortable in his presence. He laughed, the sound rich and pleasant. "Not surprised, impressed. You adapt quickly, Sophia Ellis. That's a valuable trait out here." As the evening progressed, Sophia danced not only with Frank but with several other men from the community, including the mayor and the young doctor who had recently established a practice in Fort Yuma. She noticed, however, that Frank's eyes followed her regardless of who her partner was. Between dances, they sat together at one of the tables, sharing cool cider and conversation. Frank pointed out various townspeople, adding details about their histories that Margaret hadn't mentioned. "See that man with the silver beard?" He nodded toward an elderly gentleman deep in conversation with Henry. "Samuel Porter. Fought in the Mexican War, then came here to mine. Never found gold but discovered he had a talent for metalwork. Makes the finest spurs and bits in the territory." "You know so much about everyone," Sophia observed. "Part of what I do," Frank replied. "When you guide people through unfamiliar territory, you learn to read them quickly. Understanding people keeps them safe." "And is that what you're doing with me?" she asked boldly. "Reading me to keep me safe?" Frank considered her question with surprising seriousness. "No," he answered finally. "With you I'm still learning, and that's interesting." The music changed to a livelier tune, and Frank stood, offering his hand once more. "One more dance before we get some supper." They joined the other couples for a spirited reel that left Sophia breathless and laughing. As the dance ended, Frank kept hold of her hand a moment longer than necessary, his expression warm with something that made Sophia's heart beat faster. The rest of the evening passed in a pleasant blur of good food, music, and conversation. By the time they walked home under a star-filled sky, Sophia felt truly welcomed into the community. "I had a wonderful time," she told Frank as they reached the Winters' home. Henry and Margaret had gone ahead, tactfully giving the younger couple a moment of privacy. "I'm glad," Frank replied. He seemed on the verge of saying something more than simply smiled. "Good night, Sophia. I hope to see you soon." "I'd like that," she said softly, then impulsively added, "Thank you for carrying my burdens that first day, not just the physical ones." Frank's expression grew serious. "Everyone needs help sometimes. You do the same for others." He hesitated, then gently touched her cheek with calloused fingers. "Sleep well." As Sophia watched him walk away into the night, she realized with startling clarity that she was beginning to care for this quiet, thoughtful man in a way that both excited and frightened her. Over the following weeks, Sophia settled into life in Fort Yuma. Margaret introduced her to the intricacies of running the household, while Henry taught her about the livery business. To Sophia's surprise, she found she enjoyed learning about the horses and the various aspects of caring for them. "You have a good eye," Henry complimented her one afternoon, as she correctly identified a slight lameness in one of the border horses. "Not everyone notices the small things." Sophia also began helping at the local school one afternoon each week, teaching the children needlework and reading. The activity gave her purpose and connected her more deeply to the community. Throughout this time, Frank became a regular visitor to the Winters' home. He often stopped by under the pretext of discussing business with Henry, but inevitably found his way to wherever Sophia was working. Sometimes he brought small gifts, a book he thought she might enjoy, fresh berries he'd gathered while out riding, or once, a delicate wooden hairpin he'd carved himself. "I noticed you often push your hair back when you're concentrating," he explained somewhat bashfully as he presented the gift. "Thought this might be useful." Their conversations grew deeper and more personal. Frank told her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his time serving as a scout during the latter years of the Civil War, though he'd been barely 18, and his journey west afterward. "I couldn't settle back into that life," he explained one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Everything felt too small, too confined after what I'd seen." "And now," Sophia asked, "does Fort Yuma feel like home?" Frank was quiet for a moment. "More than anywhere else has," he finally answered. "Though I'm beginning to think home isn't so much about a place as it is about people." The look he gave her left little doubt as to his meaning, and Sophia found herself both thrilled and nervous at the implication. Her feelings for Frank had grown steadily, but the memory of her parents' deaths and all she had lost remained fresh enough to make her cautious about new attachments. One bright October morning, Frank arrived at the livery with a proposition. "I need to ride out to the Chapman place," he told Sophia. "They've got a mare about to foal, and Henry mentioned you've been interested in learning more about breeding horses. Are you inviting me along?" Sophia asked, pleased by the prospect of spending the day with him away from the watchful eyes of her aunt and uncle. "If you'd like to come," Frank replied. "It's about an hour's ride each way. The countryside's beautiful this time of year." With Margaret's enthusiastic blessing and knowing look, Sophia saddled her favorite of her uncle's horses, a gentle bay mare named Willow. She packed a small lunch, and they set off under a cloudless sky. The ride was pleasant, with Frank pointing out various landmarks and sharing stories about the territory. As they rode side by side, Sophia found herself studying his profile against the landscape, the strong line of his jaw, the way the breeze ruffled his hair, the easy confidence with which he sat his horse. "You're staring," he observed without turning his head, a smile in his voice. Caught, Sophia laughed. "I was just thinking that you belong here in this landscape. You fit somehow." Frank glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." After a pause, he added, "You're beginning to fit here too, you know. I've seen how people respond to you in town. You've made a place for yourself." The Chapman farm was smaller than Sophia had expected, a modest homestead with fields of corn and wheat surrounding a simple house and barn. Mrs. Chapman, a sturdy woman with a weathered face and kind eyes, welcomed them warmly. "Frank Adler, right on time as always," she greeted them. "And you must be Sophia Ellis. We've heard good things about you from Margaret." The mare was indeed close to foaling, and Mr. Chapman, a taciturn man with enormous hands, seemed grateful for Frank's experienced assistance. Sophia watched and helped where she could, fascinated by the process, and impressed by Frank's gentle handling of the nervous animal. When the foal finally arrived, a spindly-legged colt with a white star on his forehead, Sophia found herself unexpectedly moved by the miracle of new life. Frank showed her how to help dry the newborn with clean straw, explaining each step in the process with patient detail. "He's beautiful," Sophia whispered as the wobbly colt took his first tentative steps toward his mother. "Yes," Frank agreed, but when she looked up, she found him watching her rather than the foal, his expression soft with an emotion that made her breath catch. After ensuring the mare and foal were doing well, they shared lunch with the Chapmans before beginning the ride back to Fort Yuma. The afternoon had grown warmer, and they stopped at a small creek to rest the horses and let them drink. Sophia sat on a fallen log near the water's edge, removing her hat to enjoy the breeze. Frank settled beside her, closer than propriety might dictate, but she found she didn't mind. "Thank you for bringing me today," she said. "It was a wonderful experience." "I'm glad you came," Frank replied. He seemed to be wrestling with something, his usual composure slightly unsettled. Finally, he turned to face her directly. "Sophia, I need to say something, and I hope you'll hear me out." The seriousness in his tone made her heart quicken. "Of course. When I found you on that trail with your broken wagon, I stopped because anyone would or should help a person in distress." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But from the moment you looked up at me, something changed. I can't explain it properly, but I knew." He shook his head, frustrated by his own inarticulateness. "What I'm trying to say is that these past weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, it's been the happiest time of my life." You've brought something to Fort Yuma to my life that I didn't even know was missing." Sophia sat very still, hardly daring to breathe as he continued. "I know you came here seeking refuge, not romance, and maybe it's too soon, but I find I can't keep my feelings to myself any longer." Frank reached for her hand, enveloping it in his larger one. "I'm falling in love with you, Sophia Ellis. I think I started falling the moment I saw you, and every day since has only deepened those feelings." The directness of his declaration took her breath away. In St. Louis, courtships were conducted with much more restraint, but she was discovering that the frontier had its own rules and its own honesty. "Frank," she began, her voice unsteady, "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything right now," he assured her quickly. "I don't expect you to return my feelings immediately, or even at all if that's not what's in your heart. I just couldn't keep riding beside you day after day pretending that you're just a friend to me." Sophia looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face so open and earnest in this moment of vulnerability. The truth was that her own feelings had been growing steadily, but fear of more loss had kept her from acknowledging them fully. "I care for you deeply," she said finally. "More than I expected to care for anyone after everything that happened. But I'm afraid, Frank, afraid of losing more than I already have." Frank's expression softened with understanding. "I know about loss too, Sophia. It makes us cautious. But sometimes, loving despite that fear is the bravest thing we can do." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not asking for promises, just a chance to show you that what we could have together is worth the risk." Something shifted inside Sophia then, a loosening of the tight control she'd maintained since her parents' deaths. Frank Adler had already proven himself trustworthy in so many ways from that first day, when he lightened her physical burdens to these weeks of steadily lightening her emotional ones through friendship and care. "I think," she said slowly, "that I'd like that chance too." The smile that spread across Frank's face was like sunrise breaking over the desert. Before she could say more, he leaned forward and kissed her tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft against hers, and Sophia felt herself melting into the sensation. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Frank rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted. Sophia laughed softly. "I think I've been wanting you to." They rode back to Fort Yuma hand in hand when the trail allowed, a new awareness between them that both exhilarated and comforted Sophia. By unspoken agreement, they decided not to make any formal announcement about their changing relationship yet, though Margaret's knowing smile when they returned suggested she suspected anyway. Over the next month, Frank courted Sophia with a blend of frontier practicality and surprising romance. They rode together exploring the countryside, joined community gatherings, and spent quiet evenings on the winter's porch talking long after Margaret and Henry had retired. Frank taught Sophia to shoot a rifle, insisting that every woman in the territory should know how to defend herself. She proved to be a quick study, impressing him with her steady hand and concentration. "You're a natural," he complimented her after she hit the target 3 times in succession, "though I hope you never need to use that skill in earnest." In turn, Sophia convinced Frank to attend the small literary society Margaret had started, where community members gathered to discuss books that made their way west. To her delight, he revealed himself to be well-read despite his limited formal education, offering insightful comments about Dickens and Whitman that impressed even the schoolteacher. "Where did you learn to love literature?" she asked him afterward as they walked home under a canopy of stars. "My mother," Frank replied, his voice softening with memory. "She was a teacher before she married my father. Every evening, no matter how hard the day had been, she read aloud to us, my father, my brother, and me. She believed books could take us places our bodies might never go. She sounds wonderful, Sophia said, squeezing his hand. She was, he agreed. She would have liked you very much. As November approached, bringing cooler temperatures to the Arizona territory, Sophia realized she no longer thought of St. Louis as home. Fort Yuma had become more than just a place of refuge. It was where she belonged now. And Frank had become essential to that sense of belonging. One crisp evening, Frank invited Sophia for a special supper at the small restaurant that had recently opened in town. The owner, an Italian immigrant named Giuseppe, had become a friend of Frank's, and he greeted them effusively when they arrived. "The best table for my friends," he insisted, leading them to a corner spot adorned with a white tablecloth and a small vase of desert wildflowers. "And a special menu tonight, just for you." The meal was extraordinary by frontier standards: fresh pasta, tender venison that Frank had provided from his own hunting, and a sweet wine that Giuseppe had brought all the way from California. Halfway through the meal, Sophia noticed that Frank seemed unusually nervous, his typical easy confidence replaced with an endearing awkwardness. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "You seem preoccupied." Frank set down his fork and took a deep breath. "Sophia, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." He reached across the table and took her hand. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. I wake up each morning excited to see you, to hear your voice, to make you smile. When I'm away from you, I find myself thinking about when I'll see you again." Sophia's heart began to race as she realized where this conversation was leading. "I know it hasn't been very long," Frank continued, "but out here, we learn to recognize what's genuine and valuable without needing years to be certain." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I love you, Sophia Ellis. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." He opened the pouch and tipped a ring onto his palm, a simple gold band with a small, perfect pearl set in its center. "It was my mother's," he explained. "My father gave it to me before he died, said I should save it for when I found someone special enough to wear it." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes as Frank slid from his chair to kneel beside her, the ring held between his fingers. "Will you marry me, Sophia? Will you let me spend my life carrying your burdens and sharing your joys?" The restaurant had gone silent, the other patrons watching with anticipation. Sophia was barely aware of them, focused entirely on the man before her and the life he was offering. In that moment, all her fears about loving and losing again seemed insignificant compared to the happiness Frank had brought into her life. The broken wagon that had seemed like disaster had led her not just to a new home, but to a love she hadn't dared hope for. "Yes," she answered, her voice clear and certain despite her tears. "Yes, Frank Adler, I will marry you." The restaurant erupted in applause as Frank slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her with a tenderness that made her heart overflow. When they finally broke apart, Giuseppe appeared with glasses of champagne for everyone to toast the engagement. "To new beginnings," Frank said, raising his glass to Sophia. "And to broken wagons that lead to unexpected happiness," she added with a smile. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Fort Yuma. Margaret was overjoyed, immediately beginning plans for the wedding. "December would be perfect," she declared. "Before Christmas, when the weather is still mild enough for guests to travel." Henry clapped Frank on the shoulder with approval. "You're a good man, Frank. I couldn't wish for anyone better for our Sophia." The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of preparations. Frank owned a small but comfortable house on the outskirts of town, and together they worked to make it a home, combining her salvaged possessions with his simpler furnishings. "It needs a woman's touch," he admitted as they arranged furniture one afternoon. "It's been just a place to sleep until now. You'll make it a home." Sophia found unexpected joy in these preparations, in the shared act of creating a space that would be theirs together. Margaret helped her sew curtains and a wedding quilt, while the women of the community organized a pounding, where each family brought a pound of something useful for the new household: flour, sugar, coffee, soap. December arrived with clear skies and cool temperatures. The day before the wedding, Sophia stood in the bedroom of what would soon be her new home, making final preparations. Frank had gone to meet some arriving guests, giving her a quiet moment alone. She ran her fingers over the quilt that would cover their marriage bed, thinking of the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she had been devastated by loss, forced to leave behind everything familiar, her future uncertain. Now she was about to marry a man whose strength and kindness had helped her rebuild not just her life, but her capacity for joy. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Sophia," Margaret called. "May I come in?" "Of course," Sophia answered, turning to welcome her aunt. Margaret entered carrying a small wooden box. "I have something for you, a wedding gift, though not from me." She handed Sophia the box. "This came in today's mail, from St. Louis." Puzzled, Sophia opened the box to find a letter atop a layer of tissue paper. She recognized the handwriting immediately: Mrs. Haversham, her mother's oldest friend. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the letter. "My dear Sophia," it began, "I was heartbroken to hear of your parents' passing and your subsequent departure from St. Louis. It took some time to discover where you had gone, and I pray this reaches you safely. Your mother entrusted this to me years ago, with instructions to give it to you on your wedding day. Somehow, news of your engagement reached us here, and I am fulfilling my promise to her. She would be so happy to know you have found love, especially after such sorrow." The enclosed was her most treasured possession, a gift from your father on their wedding day. She wanted you to wear it when you began your own marriage journey. "With all my love, Eleanor Haversham." Tears blurred Sophia's vision as she set aside the letter and carefully unwrapped the tissue paper. Inside lay her mother's pearl necklace, a single strand of perfectly matched creamy pearls that Sophia had always admired as a child. "Oh, Sophia," Margaret whispered, her own eyes damp. "Elizabeth's pearls. I remember when Joseph gave them to her." Sophia lifted the necklace, the pearls warm and smooth against her skin. "I never thought I'd see these again," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I thought everything of hers was lost when we had to sell the house." "She made sure this would find its way to you," Margaret said, squeezing her niece's hand. "Your mother is with you tomorrow in her own way." That evening, a small gathering was held at the Winters' home, a quiet celebration before the wedding. Friends and neighbors brought food and good wishes. But what touched Sophia most was the arrival of a delegation from the local Quechan tribe, with whom Frank had established good relations during his years as a guide. The tribal elder presented them with a beautifully woven blanket. "For warmth and protection in your new life together," he told them solemnly. "Frank Adler has been a true friend to our people. We are glad he has found happiness." Later, as the gathering wound down, Frank found a moment alone with Sophia on the porch. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" he asked, taking her hands in his. "More than ready," she assured him. "Though I admit I'm a little nervous." "About the ceremony, about everything," she confessed. "It's a big change, a new life." Frank smiled, the moonlight highlighting the affection in his eyes. "Remember that broken wagon? How it seemed like disaster at the time? How could I forget? It led me to you. Life's like that sometimes," he said thoughtfully. "What looks like our worst moment can turn out to be the beginning of our greatest joy." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I'll always be there to help carry whatever burdens come our way, Sophia. That's my promise to you." "And I'll do the same for you," she replied softly. "That's marriage, isn't it? Sharing the weight so neither has to carry it alone." Frank's answer was a kiss that held all the promise of their tomorrow. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of the union. The small church in Fort Yuma was filled to capacity with friends and neighbors. Sophia wore a simple cream-colored dress that Margaret had helped her make, accented by her mother's pearl necklace and a crown of winter greenery in her hair. Henry escorted her down the aisle, stepping in for the father who couldn't be there. When Sophia reached the altar where Frank waited, his face illuminated with love and wonder, she felt a sense of rightness so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. When they exchanged vows, Frank's voice rang out clear and confident, while Sophia's was softer but no less certain. As they exchanged rings, her mother's pearl ring joined by a plain gold band for Frank, Sophia felt the presence of those who had gone before, blessing this new beginning. "By the power vested in me," the minister concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Frank's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise sealed before their community. As they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Adler, the church erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration afterward was joyous, a feast prepared by the women of the community, music provided by local musicians, and dancing that continued well into the evening. As tradition dictated, Frank and Sophia circulated among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes from everyone. "Look at them," Margaret said to Henry as they watched the newlyweds from across the room. "Have you ever seen two people more perfectly suited?" "They complement each other," Henry agreed. "She's brought out a side of Frank I didn't know existed, and he's given her the strength to build a new life. That's what a good marriage should be." As the celebration began to wind down, Frank led Sophia outside to where a wagon waited, decorated with ribbons and greenery for the occasion. "Your carriage, Mrs. Adler," he announced with a flourish, helping her up onto the seat. With final waves to their guests, they set off for their new home, a short journey that symbolized the beginning of their life together. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Sophia leaned against Frank's solid shoulder, contentment filling her heart. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping an arm around her. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "It feels like the end of one journey and the beginning of another." When they reached their house, Frank surprised her by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. "No more broken wagons or collapsed axles," he promised with a smile. "From now on, we share the load." Inside, the home they had prepared together awaited them, simple but welcoming, with a fire already laid in the hearth by thoughtful friends who had slipped away from the celebration early to prepare this welcome. As Frank set her gently on her feet, Sophia looked around at what they had created together, not just the physical home, but the promise of a shared future built on mutual respect, understanding, and deep love. "Welcome home, Sophia Adler," Frank said softly. "Home," she repeated, the word holding new meaning now. She reached up to touch his face, overwhelmed with gratitude for this man who had appeared in her moment of greatest need and stayed to become her greatest joy. "I love you, Frank." His answering kiss was both tender and passionate, the beginning of their first night as husband and wife and all the nights to come. 5 years later, Sophia stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Frank taught their 4-year-old son Joseph to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, played nearby, arranging pebbles in careful patterns on the porch steps. The years had brought changes to Fort Yuma and to their family. The town had grown, with a proper school building now and even a small library that Sophia helped establish. Frank's reputation as a guide had expanded, bringing more work than he could handle alone, leading him to train 2 young men as apprentices. Sophia herself had started a small but successful business selling her needlework and teaching the skill to others. The winters remained a constant presence in their lives, though Henry's health had begun to decline in recent months. Margaret still bustled about with the same energy, now channeled largely into spoiling her great-niece and nephew. Life on the frontier remained challenging at times drought seasons, occasional tensions with neighboring territories, the constant work required to maintain their growing ranch. But through it all, Frank and Sophia faced each challenge together, true to their wedding day promise to share all burdens. As she watched her family in the golden afternoon light, Sophia thought back to that desperate day on the trail when her overloaded wagon had collapsed, seemingly destroying her hopes for a new beginning. What had felt like disaster had instead been the first step toward a life fuller and richer than she could have imagined. Frank looked up, catching her eye across the yard. Even after 5 years of marriage, that simple connection still sent warmth spreading through her. He said something to Joseph, then crossed to join her on the porch, lifting Elizabeth into his arms as he came. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" he asked, settling beside her on the porch swing. "About broken wagons," she answered with a smile. "And how the worst moments sometimes lead to the best ones." Frank's laugh lines deepened as he smiled, the years having added character to his handsome face. "Best decision I ever made, stopping to help a damsel in distress that day." "I wasn't exactly a damsel," Sophia protested lightly. "No," he agreed, more serious now. "You were stronger than you knew. You just needed someone to help lighten the load until you found your footing again." Elizabeth squirmed to be put down, and Frank set her gently on her feet, watching as she toddled over to continue her important work with the pebbles. "We've built something good here," Sophia said, leaning into her husband's side as they watched their children. "Something that will last." Frank's arm tightened around her shoulders. "And we're just getting started, Mrs. Adler, just getting started." As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber, Sophia knew with absolute certainty that this life built from the remains of broken dreams and unexpected kindness was exactly where she was meant to be. The wagon's collapse had been not an ending but a beginning, the moment when the weight she carried alone became a burden shared, and eventually transformed into the foundation of a happiness deeper and more enduring than she had ever dared to hope for. In the distance, Joseph's delighted laughter rang out as he successfully guided his pony in a small circle, Frank's patient instruction bearing fruit. Beside her, Elizabeth hummed a tuneless song as she arranged her pebbles in increasingly complex patterns. The simple sounds of her family, her home, her life a melody more beautiful than any Sophia had ever known. The load had been lightened, the burdens carried together, and in that sharing had come not just survival but joy. It was, Sophia reflected as she squeezed Frank's hand, the truest definition of love she could imagine and worth every step of the journey that had brought them here.